Who crucified Jesus? Who exactly do we blame for Jesus' death on the cross? I remember a friend of mine posed that question on Facebook a number of years ago, and I quickly responded with passages from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to back up my claim that the Jews were guilty. My friend retorted with, "Well, what about the Romans? Would you say that they are guilt free?" "No," I responded, "they aren't guilt-free. But the Jews, surely the Jews are the ones who actually instigated his death." When we look at our pericope, Luke 23:13 to 25, Luke actually seems to agree with me. He presents this contrasting interchange between Pilate and the Jewish crowd. First, Pilate tells the crowd that he examined Jesus and found no fault in him. And then he backs up his position by mentioning that he sent Jesus to Herod, and Herod also found no fault with Jesus. Luke then introduces Barabbas, the antithesis of everything Jesus represented. Pilate offered the Jews a choice to free an innocent man they were accusing of insurrection or to free a known insurrectionist. And Luke is showing us here that the Jews had the opportunity to actually do the right thing, but they totally passed it up. They went for the criminal, the guilty man. So, in the end, the innocent Jesus was about to die in place of the guilty human. Pilate is still seeking to release Jesus, so he asks them very reasonable questions. Why? What evil has he done? But the Jews were insistent that Jesus should be crucified, and they prevailed over Pilate. So he sentenced Jesus to death. So after Luke's presentation, who is really responsible? Do we blame the Jews because they allowed their envy of Jesus to get the best of them? Or do we blame Pilate because he gave in to them, although he had all the power? Or do we blame Jesus for being silent and not defending himself at all? Because of man's history with anti Semitism, many scholars argue that the Jews are not to be blamed for the death of Jesus. Some say that we should blame the Romans, others say to blame the Jewish leaders of that day, but not the crowd or all Jewish people. But if we look at the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all make statements that place the blame on the Jews. Both Matthew and Mark included the fact that the Jewish leaders incited the crowd to demand Jesus' death. And after the resurrection, Luke describes an incident on the road to Emmaus where one disciple says to the stranger that the chief priests and rulers delivered and condemned Jesus to die. And John includes Jesus' statement to Pilate that the ones who delivered him, the Jews, to Pilate had the greater sin. Well, you might say that the gospel writers were biased because they were followers of Jesus themselves. Of course, they would blame the Jews. However, Josephus was unbiased. He was a Pharisee and a Roman sympathizer. In his work Antiquities, there is a passage known as the Testimonium Flavianum, where he mentioned that the Jewish leaders were the ones who delivered Jesus to Pilate to be crucified. But the gospel writers and Josephus weren't the only ones to actually allude to Jewish guilt. 4th century Jews accepted their own guilt, according to the Babylonian Talmud. Their commentary on the matter has been removed from the modern Talmud, as you can imagine, because of its implications and its consequences. Can we really say that the Jews are innocent of the death of Jesus? They incited it, they insisted on it, and they acknowledged it. Anti Semitism and its consequences are awful and should be persecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But does the unfortunate actions of some Christians make the Jews innocent? It does not. What makes the Jews innocent to the modern day Christians is forgiveness. And what about the Romans? Do they try to prove their innocence as well? No, they do not. In fact, they have always historically recorded the accuracy of the matter. Tacitus, in his work Annals, says point blank that Pilate crucified Jesus and indicates that multiple Roman emperors persecuted the Jesus followers. Biblically and historically, we can prove that Pilate had the opportunity to release Jesus, but he didn't. Most likely because of his dedication to Rome, the country that he likely loved, and his dedication to the emperor, whom he likely feared. So we see that the Jews are not innocent, and we see that the Romans are not innocent. But what about God's will? While the pericope demonstrates that Jesus was crucified by Pilate at the insistence of the truth is that he would never have been crucified if it wasn't God's will. In fact, God prophesied of Jesus' death way back in the Old Testament. The most popular passage is probably Isaiah 53, where in verse 10 Isaiah says, "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, he has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand." Here Isaiah indicates that Jesus' death was the will of God, as Jesus was going to be offered for sin. So whether the Jews or the Romans were or were not involved, Jesus would have still been crucified. So we know from the Old Testament that God intended for Jesus to be crucified. However, in the New Testament, Jesus also predicted his own death. On one occasion, the Pharisees told Jesus to leave the public because Herod was looking for him. Instead of Jesus running away, he told them that he was going to go into Jerusalem regardless. On another occasion, he pulled his disciples aside to tell them that he would be crucified in Jerusalem as the Jews would deliver him into the hands of the Romans. Far be it for me not to mention that in the garden, Jesus asked God for the cup to pass from him, but he ultimately tells God, "Not my will, but yours be done." Regardless of who physically did what, God's will was for Jesus to die. Other than predicting and going toward his own death, Jesus presented no defense for his alleged crimes. According to Witherington, self-defense was the only defense for the accused in a Roman trial. Yet Jesus chose silence. He didn't defend himself. Why did he not try to save himself? Because he knew that God was the one who willed for him to die to save the world. So we've seen that the Old Testament prophesied of Jesus' death, and we've seen that Jesus predicted his own death. Furthermore, he presented no defense to try to escape death. But we also see now that the disciples pointed back to Jesus' death as the will of God. In Acts 2, when Peter gave that rousing rendition on the day of Pentecost, in verse 23, he says, "Him being delivered by the determined purpose and foreknowledge of God, you have taken by lawless hands and have crucified and put to death." So what delivered Jesus up to die according to Peter? Well, it was the determined purpose and foreknowledge of God. In other words, the will of God. So it does not surprise us that God would use the wickedness of the Jews and the politics of Rome to allow for Jesus to be crucified. Doesn't God do this throughout history? Hasn't God used the flaws of men to accomplish his purpose on multiple occasions? Remember Joseph's, "You meant it for evil, but the Lord meant it for good"? And Paul in Romans mentions that God used Pharaoh to accomplish his mission. Our God is greater. He knows better. So again, regardless of who did what, he had a plan, and his plan would be fulfilled no matter what. I really love how F.F. Bruce commented on the whole matter of the crucifixion of Jesus. He says, "The terrible responsibility for the rejection of such a man fell squarely on the shoulders of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, but their unreasoning hatred became the instrument of the fulfillment of the divine plan established in the foreknowledge of God." Though the Jews and Romans played a part in Jesus' death, Jesus was ultimately crucified to fulfill the will of God. Therefore, no race of people should suffer injustices forever because of his death.